Hello, everyone. Good day to you all. Welcome back to the fourth webinar series. We took a bit of a break as we prepped for the Roadmap Conference, but we are back. This is the first webinar of the fall 2022 season, and we have four more exciting topics for you all. Today, our speakers will highlight how we do better involve and include communities when moving from community engagement to policy advocacy under how community engagement leads to policy action. My name is Simbiat Yusuf. I am the Member Relations Manager at Fourth. And before I pass it along to our moderator today, Alexa Diaz, who is the Senior Policy Manager at Fourth, we have a few updates from the Fourth team. Attendees, we ask that you please submit all of your questions through the attendee chat. We will send the presentation as well as additional resources at the end of the webinar. We will also make sure the webinar slides and the recording is shared. And if you have any questions, we will have time for them during the Q&A portion of the webinar. And just if you've forgotten who we are at Fourth during our break, we are on a mission to electrify transportation. We bring people together to create solutions that reduce pollution and barriers to access. We are working in 5 focus areas, which are policy advocacy, events and partnerships, access to electric cars, access to charging, and access to emerging modes. If you want to learn more about our work and what we've done, you can find that information at fourthmobility.org. And the webinars and our programs are not possible without the support of our members and sponsors. We want to take the opportunity to thank our sponsor today, the City of Portland Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, for helping put on this webinar. We also want to thank our members for continuously supporting us. And if you have any questions regarding membership or how you can support the webinar series, you can reach out directly to me. My information is on the screen, and I will be the one sending you all of the recap information so you can reply to that as well. And we are currently hiring. We have some positions currently available. If you or someone within your network is looking to enter the transportation electrification space, or you have some recommendations, we have the business development manager as well as other positions currently available. Please share within your networks, and we will include links to these positions in the recap for you all. And thanks in advance for sharing. And I hope you didn't miss the Roadmap conference this year, which came back in person after being offline. Not in person for 2 years. So if you missed any of the program, you can find more information about the program, the presentation, some videos from our keynotes on the website roadmap4.org. And it is not too early to save the date. May 15th through the 17th, 2023, we will be back in Portland for the Roadmap Conference. So save the date, and we hope you can join us then. And now I will pass it along to our moderator, Alexa Diaz. Alexa?
Thank you, Simbi. Hi, everyone. My name is Alexa Diaz. I'm a Senior Policy Manager at Fourth, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's webinar. And first, I just want to say once again, thank you to our sponsor, the City of Portland Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. So now it's time to introduce our great panelists. I will ask them to turn on their webcams. So first up, we have Andrea Marpillero-Colomina, Sustainable Communities Program Director with GreenLatinos, where she advocates for policy making that will create a just and environmentally sustainable future for communities. Next, we have Anissa Pemberton, Grants and Operations Manager with 350 PDX. Anissa joined the climate justice movement in 2018 as a field organizer and has had the opportunity to grow as a coalition organizer and fundraiser by serving on the staff at 350 PDX and Coalition of Communities of Color. And finally, we have José Acosta-Córdova, Environmental Planning and Research Organizer with the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization. José has a long history of organizing and comes from a family of activists who are committed to the environmental justice movement. Here at Fourth, for our webinars, we like to get started with a short icebreaker just to get everyone talking. And in the spirit of today's theme, our icebreaker is, what is a myth about community engagement? And I will get started. I think I always had the idea that you can't really do community engagement virtually. And I have been proven wrong time and time again over the course of the pandemic, but especially over the past 8 months. And I will pass it to Anissa to answer the icebreaker question.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Alexa. That's a great myth. That's also one I learned during the pandemic. I think another myth is that, community engagement is just door knocking or just going up to random people's homes and saying, hey, when it's really about community building and creating more shared understanding. And I'll pass it to Andrea.
Yeah, I totally agree with both of those. I would say another myth about community engagement, sort of similar to the door knocking, is that there's a place you go to engage the community. And that is also, I find, to be untrue. The community is often many communities. And so the place where you might find one piece of a community is not the same place where you would find the other, or places. And I think that is a big shortcoming in the way that a lot of community engagement happens. And I'll pass it to Jose.
Thank you, and I definitely echo what's been said. I guess one for me would also be that community engagement is like a cookie cutter kind of process, and I think right each neighborhood, each community is unique, and I think you have to sometimes go where the people are at and understand how you can adapt what you're trying to do to that local community, and and also then think about what the needs of that particular community are. So it's not a cookie cutter kind of process.
Great. Thank you. I am looking forward to talking more about community engagement and hearing each of your presentations. But before we get started on that, I'm going to ask you all to briefly turn off your webcam as I give a little bit of introduction to the topic. So today's webinar is how community engagement leads to policy action. At Fourth, I co-manage the Towards Equitable Electric Mobility Community of Practice, or TEAM for short. It's in partnership with the GreenLatinos Institute. It's a multi-year, multi-state initiative where we focus on building capacity, learning together, and ultimately building relationships. We do this in a whole host of ways. We bring together 31 organizations ranging in different types of expertise, from renewable energy, environmental justice, public health. I could keep going on and on about all the great organizations that are a part of TEAM. And we're currently in 5 states, which are listed here on the screen. But the goal of TEAM is for these organizations to come together to prioritize and co-develop strategies that will advance equitable electric mobility policies and programs. We spent our first year of TEAM building relationships and laying that foundation. And as we've moved into our second year of TEAM, we have been thinking about, okay, so how do we get that done? And as a community of practice in our 5 states. And what we found is that many of our states, we need to start with understanding what the community wants and needs. So over this past year, several of our states have already gotten started on these community engagement events and listening sessions. And that's how I definitely learned that you can do virtual community engagement, because many of these have been virtual and just full of rich conversations, and I've learned so much. But as we've been doing those and as we've been planning for these events, one thing that we keep coming back to is we want to be intentional about how we're going into different communities. How are we communicating clearly with community members, CBOs, local neighborhood groups, on how we're going to use their feedback? I think what we find time and time again is that groups will come in, do community engagement, and then they will go away and the information just gets lost in a vacuum somewhere. So that is not what we want to do in TEAM, and I'm sure that for the folks that are on this call today, that is also not what you all want to do. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation, talking to our 3 great speakers about how they have done just that, going from community engagement to policy action. Before I pass it over to Anissa, I do want to say, as you're listening to these presentations, taking notes, if your questions pop up, please drop them in the chat. On the back end, we'll be going through all of those questions, and we'll try to get through as many as we can in the Q&A portion. And if we don't get to your question during the webinar, it's short, it's only an hour, then we will try and get to that over email. All right, with that, let's pass it over to Anissa.
Thank you, Alexa. Hi, everyone. My name is Anissa. I use they, them pronouns. And today I'm going to be talking about the Portland Clean Energy Fund. This is the first ever clean energy fund for climate justice. And we're going to be talking about what it is, how it came to be, and what's going on with it today. Next slide. So yeah, the Portland Clean Energy Fund, we often refer to it as PCEF. So if I slip into acronym soup, this is what I'm saying. It was established by a successful ballot measure in 2018. It was passed by 65% of Portland voters. It is the first ever environmental measure in Oregon that has been created and led by communities of color. So these are the community-based organizations that are behind this ballot measure. We started the steering committee in, I believe, 2015, and it took us a couple of years to get our feet under us. So we spent 2015 to 2018 really writing the ballot measure and building the early coalition. In early 2018, we filed the initiative petition with the city of Portland. In mid-2018 is when I kind of entered the picture, actually, for signature gathering, and we collected 61,000 signatures. We needed 34,000 to get on the ballot. And in late 2018, we passed it on the ballot. So some of these organizations, as you can see, are folks that I've worked with closely over the years. So my own organization, my current organization, 350 PDX, and my former organization, the Coalition of Communities of Color, as well as Apano, Verde, Portland NAACP, Opal Environmental Justice, and the Native American Family Center. And then allied groups included 350 PDX, Sierra Club, Portland Audubon, Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility, and Columbia Riverkeeper. So the Portland Clean Energy Fund is funded through a 1% surcharge on retailers whose annual sales are over $1 billion nationally and over $500,000 in the city of Portland. It only affects the largest corporations. And, you know, honestly, the fund has been raising a lot of money. We've been raising about $90 million annually since it was passed on the ballot. About 40 to 60% of these funds goes towards renewable energy and energy efficiency programs. 20 to 25% goes to job training, apprenticeships, and contractor support. And 10 to 15% goes towards regenerative agriculture and green infrastructure. Another 5% is assigned towards future innovation, which is an exciting category. This is a category where I've often seen folks create applications for like e-bikes and other biking opportunities, as well as other transportation related matters. And apologies, I have a slight error on my slide. So I wanted to talk mostly today about what the Portland Clean Energy Fund looks like in action. So last year in 2021, the City Council approved the first round of funding. It was about 45 grants, and it totaled about $8.6 million. 100% of these grants went to Black, Indigenous, and people of color and low-income serving organizations in Portland, and it supported projects from job training and clean energy construction to community food and medicinal gardens. So I'm just going to share like some highlights about these grants, but this is just a snapshot just to keep in mind. So Constructing Hope has a very exciting project. They are a Black-led workforce development organization in Portland. They were founded as a part of a community development corporation to combat gentrification in the state's largest Black neighborhood. So their goal with this grant was to train and support career advancement in the trades, so in union work, for low-income people of color and women, and with a particular focus on formerly incarcerated folks. They received $500,000 to assist low-income people of color and women to enter careers in weatherization, solar installation, and other clean energy skilled trades, which, remain heavily dominated by white men. So these grant funds supported everything from training to career placement and advancement to tools and union dues at no cost to the participants. The Black Food Sovereignty Coalition is another interesting grant opportunity. So this is a collaboration between Black and Brown communities to confront the systemic barriers that make food, place, and economic opportunities inaccessible. This group received $100,000 to do a planning grant. So in the Portland Clean Energy Fund, we created options for folks to do planning grants in which folks could plan to build up a bigger program over time. And this is one way that can really be helpful to building community engagement because folks will have the time and the resources to really do that engagement. So they wanted to research the best methods of harvesting clean energy, to manage runoff from rainfall, and to show the best ways to reduce the carbon footprint at their Black Futures Farm. They'll also be able to pay a real living wage to contractors and workers assisting with this work. Finally, for 2021, I wanted to highlight quickly There They Build. This is a social enterprise organization that designs and builds environmental infrastructure while training and employing community members in Coley, which is one of Portland's most polluted neighborhoods. They received $165,000 to provide and install heat pumps to low-income communities and communities of color in Portland. So ductless heat pumps provide lower energy consumption, they lower utility bills, and they help with air filtration. And most of the housing in Portland and in Oregon is not equipped with AC or air filtration, and so most low-income folks and renters are particularly at risk from heat waves and air pollution from both industry and wildfire. In 2022, we released even more money, which is really exciting. So in July of this year, we released 66 grants that totaled $120 million. And there was an emphasis on planning grants this year as well. So a few of the folks I wanted to highlight today are the African American Alliance for Home Ownership, who focused on clean energy. They received a $1.7 million grant that will be for 3 years. It is to provide a deep whole home energy efficiency retrofits for 60 low-income and Black homeowners. They're also going to be providing climate-conscious education curriculum through webinars, focus groups, and related events for homeowners to qualify for increased levels of funding for energy efficiency projects. These project upgrades to their homes will include air sealing installation, high-efficiency heating and cooling, high-efficiency water heating, lighting improvements, and critical home repair that is necessary to fix systemic issues within their home. And it is projected that folks will save an annual average of 30% per home. The affiliated tribes of the Northwest Indians has a workforce grant. They have a $3.7 million grant for 3 years, and they're going to be establishing the first ever tribal solar and renewable energy training program. So the outcomes of this grant will include 30 students who will receive advanced degrees in order to join the clean energy sector. So some of these degrees include the Associate for Applied Sciences or the Limited Renewable Technician's License. Finally, I wanted to mention the Rosewood Initiative will be doing a regenerative agriculture project. They receive a $2 million grant over the course of 5 years, and they will be creating a community garden with a half-acre green space adjacent to the Rosewood Initiative's new building. And so Black, Indigenous, and people of color neighbors are going to be able to access healthy and culturally appropriate fruits and vegetables. And they also will be able to help reduce urban heat island scores, increase air quality, and create a more resilient neighborhood. I messed up the slides, but my last slide was just how to stay in touch with us. Thank you. Mysterious slide fixer, I appreciate you. So you can check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and you can also sign up to receive email blasts. And of course, I always encourage folks to get involved in the organizations that I mentioned on the steering committee for the Portland Clean Energy Fund Coalition, as always, community-based work is best done by community-based organizations. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Anissa. I look forward to talking more about planning grants and how they can be used to do intentional community engagement, and talking through multiple benefits that these allow us to have. So things like jobs, public health benefits, housing, saving money. So yeah, thank you for that overview. And next up we have Jose, who please turn on your webcam. Wonderful. And I will pass it to you to talk more about your work with LVEJO in Illinois.
Great, thank you, Alexa. Oh, went to the wrong one. Sorry, y'all. Not sure where my slides went. Ah, there we go. Thank you for that. And so yeah, I'm gonna be talking to you a little bit about the role of freight and warehousing in Chicago, in the Chicago region, and some of the work that we're doing to reform the system and to deal with the issues that that diesel pollution creates in communities of color throughout the Chicago area. And yeah, just again to reiterate the um, what's it called? Well, actually, no. Let me just go forward. So I want to start with the land acknowledgement. Always want to do that anytime we start meetings or start presentations. Right in the Chicago area, we're in the land of the Potawatomi, the Peoria, Miami, and the Sioux, and also part of the larger Council of the Three Fire, which included the Potawatomi, the Odawa, and the Ojibwe. And it's critical to acknowledge the indigenous peoples of Chicago region because they played such a crucial role in the initial growth of the city. It's an often left out piece of our city's history. But Chicago, actually, as we know it, would not be here had it not been for the different trails and railways, or I'm sorry, waterway infrastructure that indigenous people had been using for countless decades, centuries, thousands of years. And so, for those of you who aren't familiar with Little Village, who aren't familiar who aren't from the city of Chicago, excuse me, who aren't from the area, Little Village is located directly southwest of downtown, um, and it's actually also technically called South London, which is one of the 77 community areas, official community areas of Chicago. Um, oh, not sure what happened there. Or is that just on mine, or is that on the whole? I can't see the slideshow anymore. Right, folks. Apologies for the technical difficulties. Um, but yeah, what you see here outlined in the red is a community of Little Village, aka South Lawndale, and it's a neighborhood that has a very significant industrial history. You see that there's a body of water that travels through the southern portion of the neighborhood. That's the Sanitarian Ship Canal, which I'll talk more about in a second. But all the area along the canal is industrial on both sides. And actually, we have an official industrial corridor, one of 26 industrial corridors in the city of Chicago, that's located there on the southern portion of the neighborhood. It accounts for about 44% of our total land in the neighborhood. Um, and and actually, when you count for areas outside of the industrial corridor that are also zoned as industrial, we actually have about 53% of our land that's dedicated to industry. And then the area where people actually live, we have about anywhere from 70 to 100,000 people in the community, and I say that because it's largely an immigrant population, and we know that when it comes to census counts and dealing with undocumented folks, or just in general, Latinos and Latinx folks, we know that they're a hard to count population. Um, so we know it could be anywhere from 70 to 100,000. We also located right on the city limits, so directly to the west of us, which for you would be on the left side of this map, is the city of Cicero. Uh, and um, and last thing I'll say is that if you're not familiar with Chicago, I definitely recommend checking out Little Village. 26th Street is our main commercial corridor, one of the busiest commercial corridors in the city of Chicago. Grosses roughly $1 billion a year, a little bit under $1 billion a year in sales tax revenue, and actually the second most vibrant corridor after the Magnificent Mile. So it's like really just a mix of small businesses and restaurants and a whole bunch of great, food vendors and stuff like that. So definitely recommend checking out Little Village if you've never been. So who we are as an organization, we're established in 1994. And actually this picture was taken before the pandemic, so we've actually grown significantly since then. But we are part of countless communities across the city, across the country, and across the world who are fighting the same fight, which is fighting against environmental racism. And our key campaigns are the Just Transition campaign, which is what I'm a part of, which includes our transportation work, food justice, water justice, and open space and park justice. And we also we do a lot of youth work that's and kind of incorporated into all the different campaigns that we have. And then also want to highlight this diagram here. This is the Just Transition um, framework, economic framework. If you're not familiar with this, I highly recommend you check it out. The Climate Justice Alliance and the Just Transition Alliance, of course, which we are a part of, national networks and coalitions of organizations working on EJ and climate justice issues. And this is really how we kind of frame all the work that we do. And is how do we get away from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy? How do we build a new world that's sustainable, that doesn't pollute, doesn't kill our planet, doesn't harm our people, and that's rooted in equity and cooperation. So just give you a quick overview of some of the EJ victories that we've had. We want our probably most significant victory was the shutting down of a coal plant, which was a 12-year fight and took actually we had some national support on that work as well. And one of the things that we did was we collaborated with some researchers at Harvard to do an assessment or to do a study on how many on the impact that the coal plant was having in the community, and they found that 550 ER visits, 1,800 severe asthma attacks, and 42 premature deaths were attributed to the coal plant every year. Even after that study was released, it still took the city 9 years to take any real action. This is actually still a fight that we're ongoing with. Although we did close down the coal plant, it was recently demolished and replaced by a 1.3 million square foot distribution center. So we traded one source of pollution for another. So yeah, we're still in this fight with this particular site. The other one is La Vita Park, which was formerly a Superfund site, and that we was a 14-year fight to get the funding for this, which we had state and federal funding and city funding as well, and it's now been replaced by a beautiful park, one of two major parks in the community. And then I want to start. I also want to go back to the Sanitarian Ship Canal, because this is a really significant part of Chicago's history. And without the construction of this canal, the city of Chicago and Little Village would not be what it is today. What this canal did was it connected the Great Lakes to the Mississippi River and made it possible to take a boat between the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico and all the bodies of water in between. So this is what led to Chicago becoming such a crucial industrial city, and why it became a crucial point for distribution, and for the movement of goods. So one of the things that we use a lot to inform community is through the use of mapping. And I think when if you're not familiar with Chicago, it is the most segregated big city in the country. And one of the reasons why maps are so crucial, I think, is because a lot of the maps look the same, right? You see here that that Black and Latino populations are in blue and in orange, and if you look at a lot of other maps, whether it comes to poverty or income inequality, all the different socioeconomic issues you can think of, all the maps look identical. And of course, the same could be said for pollution. So this is one map that shows the 26 industrial corridors and how they're all zoned. So the heavier industry, manufacturing and moving and storing goods, are all located in Black and brown neighborhoods on the south and west sides. And then these are two maps that or the first map we on the left, we worked with NRDC to create this cumulative burdens and cumulative impacts map. And again, it shows where pollution is concentrated the most. And then the one on the right is a map that was made by Department of Public Health, which again shows has a little bit of a different formula, but came with again almost identical results. Um, and then again, like I said, right, Chicago is the freight hub of North America. Um, and the reason for this, why it's so important, is because 6 out of the 7 Class 1 railroads converge in the area, the only part of the continent where that occurs. And heavy duty trucks account for 1 in 7 vehicles, and with some of those facilities carrying 30,000 trucks a day. Um, and what those facilities are, they are intermodal rail yards, also known as inland ports. We have 19 of them total in the Chicago area, 8 of which are located within the city. And as you can see here, they're all located in Latino and Black communities. Um, and of course, these facilities attract, again, 30,000 trucks a day. Together or combined, they actually have about 18 million containers that pass through, 18 or 19 million containers that pass through these intermodals every year. We don't know how many of them are staying in the Chicago area because there's such a lack of data, lack of oversight. But we know that they're all located in Black and brown communities, and a lot of the warehouses and distribution centers and other heavy truck intensive facilities all locate as close to these rail yards as possible, because these are where the goods are coming into the city. Um, so again, pollution is highly concentrated around these areas as well. And this is what it looks like in Little Village, right? We have I think close to 93 facilities in Little Village and the surrounding areas that are truck intensive sites. And it doesn't matter where the schools are, where parks are. You see that the facilities are located next to them. So there's no oversight by the city. There's no any kind of regulatory process to hold these industries accountable, and that's part of what we're doing to fight. Right, is just because there's a major lack of regulatory entities. We are trying to reform that, so we're advocating for things like a port authority, looking at the state of California and what they've done with their air resources board and their air quality districts, and trying to get that passed at the state level as well. And there's also a lack of state policies that enforce electrification, like the Advanced Clean Truck Rule, like the NOx Omnibus Rule, and also the emerging Advanced Clean Fleet Rule. So that's what we're currently working on. We've created a coalition called Net Z, which stands for Neighbors for Equitable Transition to Zero Emissions, and we're currently working on getting these rules passed at the state level, and hopefully, at least with heavy duty truck electrification, we can deal with the immediate issue of air pollution, and yeah, hopefully clean up our community. So I could talk more about this, and I had to go through this really quickly, but hopefully we'll have more time to chat in the Q&A. And yeah, there's our info for social media. So if you want to learn more about the work that we're doing, please follow us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jose, for that overview. And I look forward to going into the discussion section and talking more about how your coalition will be doing community engagement and building community power to get that step passed. All right, I will pass it over to Andrea to talk about her work with GreenLatinos.
Thanks so much. Yeah, these have been incredibly inspiring presentations for me to listen to, and it's so great to hear about the work that Anissa and Jose are doing on the ground in our communities. I'm sort of an outlier here because GreenLatinos is not a community-based organization. We're a nationwide, a national comunidad that convenes Latino climate and conservation advocates. And so the role that we play as an organization is less about engaging in these incredibly important and valuable ways directly in communities, and more about, sort of, we play two different roles. On the one side, we are advocating for better policymaking in a range of climate and conservation issue areas. My portfolio focuses on, what we decided falls under sustainable communities, which, to put it as sort of succinctly as possible, is like physical infrastructure. So transportation and energy infrastructure in communities, making that infrastructure cleaner, making holding government officials and government agencies accountable for the detrimental impacts of those infrastructure, and including communities in the infrastructure process, the infrastructure installation or deinstallation process, and ensuring that those communities are first on the list for particularly disproportionately impacted communities, are first on the list for jobs and education and other engagement opportunities. And then the other piece of the work that we do at GreenLatinos is really using our policy-based approach to provide support where we are able for community organizations and other locality-based or issue-based organizations that are working on the ground in communities across the country. So I just wanted to sort of say that before we headed into my presentation, because I think this is interesting stuff to think about on the heels of these really interesting community-based and city-based projects and initiatives that Jose and Anissa have introduced. And so, one thing that we think about all the time, of course, because GreenLatinos is representing the interests of Latinos when it comes to climate and conservation priorities. Latinos are, by 2045, expected to comprise nearly a quarter of the U.S. population. Latino communities persistently encounter disproportionate economic and health impacts from pollution, particularly from vehicle tailpipe emissions, which come in large part from port, freight, and highway infrastructure that has been disproportionately placed in Black and Latino communities across the United States as a result of, decades of racist policymaking. That, some more intentional than others, including redlining, including the decision of where to locate highway projects when the federal interstate highway system was being built in, the mid 20th century. Latinos are overrepresented among people living in poverty. They face poor health outcomes. Latino children have much higher rates of asthma than white children pretty much nationwide, and Latinos sort of across the board are visiting emergency rooms at higher rates than their white counterparts for respiratory related illness, much of which is due to exposure to tailpipe emissions and to vehicle pollutants. So one thing that it's also really interesting and is like a huge thing that I think about a lot in my work is that 2/3 of Latinos are concerned about climate change. So, both voter, that's 85% of Latino voters who want to see government action on reducing pollution. But that's a lot of the population, the Latino population, the Latino communities that are like, hey, this is a really important thing, and we need to be thinking about this. We need to be thinking about building green infrastructure, providing clean jobs, making environmental reparations in those places where they are most needed. So, transportation, as I'm sure probably every single person here knows, is the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. Just over a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions are due to transportation, and much of that comes from cars. The sort of percentage of transportation emissions in the overall greenhouse gas emission sort of impacts has increased more than any other sector. And so we're really seeing here basically a desperate, urgent need to produce better transportation vehicles, cleaner transportation, and more equitable access to the energy that powers our transportation, and for that energy to come from cleaner sources. We know, right, the data is there. We know that clean infrastructure can create substantial, not only health, but also economic and social gains by improving mobility and access, and also making our air cleaner, which means less people are spending time in the emergency room, going to the hospital, missing school and work, etc. And this drives so much of the work that we do at GreenLatinos, where we really push hard for equity, particularly when it comes to electrification. EV equity is one of the, I would say, the largest extent challenge of our time, where we have to really figure out how to get electrified transportation options into every community, into communities where folks are lower income, into communities where folks are not driving their own cars, into communities where there is strong car culture sort of centered around gas-powered cars. And so equity must be central to EV infrastructure planning, and it has to be crucial to sort of understanding how these communities can best be served as we end reliance on greenhouse gas emission vehicles. So the way that we approach our work, as we really push for sort of reducing vehicle emissions, we really highlight the need for improving health outcomes and environmental quality of life in Latino and other frontline communities. We advocate directly with federal agencies to support policy for stronger fuel efficiency. So just for example, this year, I've testified several times at this point at USDOT and EPA hearings regarding clean vehicle standards, regarding funding programs that the federal government is considering implementing or considering revising in order to more completely integrate EV infrastructure. Just yesterday, I gave comment about the proposed National Electrification Vehicle Infrastructure Program, which is being co-led by USDOT and the Department of Energy, and push back on some of the sort of shortcomings of that policy. All of this we're doing, right, with the hope that then better policy will be created, and the folks that are working at the state level and on the ground are going to see positive impacts in those communities. And we also work frequently in coalitions. So we write letters with other organizations that we consider to be like-minded and share our priorities. And we also do a range of sort of media-based engagement. So you can see on the right side of the slide, there's a screen grab of me doing a TikTok video. I've never felt older than when I was doing a TikTok video and like had no idea what I was doing. With Consumer Reports last autumn, where we were seeking to familiarize folks with EV infrastructure and what it looks like, right? What is an EV charger? How does it work? How much can you expect it to cost? How long does it take to charge your car? All of that information is incredibly important for people as we move forward with electrifying EV or vehicle infrastructure in the coming decade. The other thing that we spend a lot of time thinking about, and I spend a lot of time thinking about, is the fact that the way that people experience policy and experience the impact of these policies that are made at the federal level, and even policies, of course, that are made at the state and the city level in their communities is totally different than the way that they're made, right? So like policies are made by these individual departments or agencies that have this very, very specific range of jurisdiction. And so like this is a cross section of a street, and you can see that in this cross section, there is several agencies are involved, right? The city planning department, the Department of Transportation, the Parks Department, but the way that the person experiences that street is as a whole, right? And so there is really urgent need for all of these different departments and many others that are sort of not labeled and pictured here to be working together, right? To make communities be as as best as they can be for the people living with them, and supporting the efforts of community organizations and of locality-based organizations on the ground that are developing these projects, developing pilots, developing initiatives, developing innovative engagement strategies for communities. So I think I'm going to stop there so we can get into the discussion. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I really appreciated that graphic that you had. I hadn't seen it explained that way, and I think it makes a whole lot of sense. All right, everyone else, Anissa and Jose, please get on camera. I see that you're there. We're going to get started on a discussion. We don't have too much time, so let's just dive right into it, and I'll get us started. So I think given the context, all of us advocates in the virtual room, both speakers and audience, are excited and know that there's tons of funding coming down from the federal government into states and communities. So I think something we all need to be thinking about is how do we ensure that we are practicing intentional community engagement in the context where many community members and local neighborhood groups and CBOs, right, have been repeatedly asked for input, feedback, letters to sign on to, or writing letters, but they haven't always seen the policies and project outcomes delivered in their neighborhoods. Whoever would like to get started on that, go ahead.
I could take it first if nobody else wants, but I think it's a really important question and a really important challenge as well that we're dealing with, right? When you have communities that have been have dealt with different city planning processes and have not seen the outcomes that were promised, or have seen the city or developers or whoever go back on promises, and it's really hard for them to actually have any faith in that process, right? So it is a difficult challenge. I think for one of the things that we try to do is at least be that bridge between what community wants and what and then holding the city accountable to that. But again, which isn't always easy. It's very much a based on political will, and the city of Chicago can be a little bit complicated because it's no secret that corruption was embedded into the way that the city functions, right? And from our we have 50 wards, 50 aldermen, right? So when you have 50 city councilors that are all competing for different interests, it's very tough. So and they have this one thing in particular called aldermanic prerogative, which means they can basically say they can either support or oppose a project in their ward, and the rest of the aldermen and the city as a whole can't do anything about it. So I'll stop there because I don't want to take up too much more time. But I think it's really difficult.
Yeah, I would echo that it is a challenge. I would say that I'm excited about the Portland Clean Energy Fund, in part because I think it could be a model for how to do community-based planning. I think we still have yet to really actualize that in the program in terms of we began to do all this outreach and this engagement. Not to say the program isn't doing that, but just that it's going to be a long-term process, and it should be a long-term process to figure out how communities would like this money to be used, what's the best way to use it, how do we leverage these funds in the most responsible and accountable way. And so I think that's the other piece of this, is being honest with communities that it will take an iterative process. We are undoing a system of oppression in most parts of this country that has existed for 500 years. So this is not something we're going to undo overnight. And we need to be really honest with folks and talk to them about the consequences of that, and talk about what our realistic goals are versus our really long-term 7-generation goals, as I have adopted to calling them, of what would we like to see for our children and our children's children. So kind of grabbing people and what can we do now while keeping in mind the longer-term vision that we all hold.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And hearing themes between the presentations and what y'all are saying around, bridging being a bridge between community and whatever government entity, whether that's like GreenLatinos being this link between smaller organizations and the federal government, or Anissa and Jose, the work y'all are doing between community and maybe a city or a state. So thank you for that. I think going a little bit more specific, also related to intentional community engagement, we want to be intentional about negotiations, prioritization, and accountability to community members. I think, Anissa, you were just saying, just talking about that, right, of wanting to be transparent and honest. Can you all point to some best practices or examples that highlight how to do negotiations, prioritization of policies or programs, and once again, being accountable, that maybe advocates that are on this call today can take away from this webinar?
I would say I think it's really important for folks to know that communities know best, right? And every and every community is different, and I think that's one of the big challenges with and sort of faults of the way that policy making happens, is that these big policies are sort of created at the federal or even at the state or even at the municipal level, and they're rolled out, and there isn't a lot of consideration given to the dynamics that already exist in individual communities and how those dynamics, whether they be racial, political, social, geographical, economic, a combination, right? And that can impact so much how a really well-intentioned policy like, an EV electrification policy, for example, it is received, and the impact it has on that community, and also sort of what that does for a community's sort of existing trauma and existing fears, right? Like if you roll up in a gentrifying community and you start installing EV chargers everywhere, and none of the people in that community own an EV, they're going to be like, well, this is not for me, right? This infrastructure is not for me. And potentially the interpretation, quite fairly, could be, this infrastructure is anticipating that I will no longer live here, right? And that's a really real fear, and that's something that I think is on policymakers and is on elected officials to do. Well, they have to be the ones doing the work, figuring out what it is that their communities need and how they can communicate the intended impact, hopefully positive, of that infrastructure in their communities, right? Rather than just being like, it's here, you're welcome, vote for me in November. Because that doesn't build trust, and it doesn't take into account the fact that, like, every single community, every community is a snowflake, right? It's every single one is different, and they all come to the table with different priorities, different histories, different traumas, and different needs.
Yeah, and bouncing off of that, I think really having community involved in the planning of all of this. I mean, I think to me, like, the biggest solution is trusting those communities to tell us what they need. So maybe, maybe a bus line would serve them better sometimes than an EV vehicle, charging station, and kind of sitting with that and accepting that maybe they want something else. And maybe there's like a both and here, where we can both like have EV charging stations and we can have more public transit options. So I think kind of taking it down to, what are communities really asking for at the end of the day? And I think that's one of the things that excites me about programs like PSEF and statewide action we've been having in Oregon, because I think we've pretty much gone to them consistently. With PSEF, we're literally saying, we're going to give you money to accomplish whatever your visions are. And I think that sort of work is really exciting. It requires a lot of reciprocality and trust and understanding of how these systems might play out. But I think that it can be really impactful and transformative to start to do that work, even in small ways.
And yeah, just to build off of what Andrea and Anissa are saying, I think one of the things that we've seen a lot happen is like whenever there is a planning process and they do invite, a number of community organizations to, um, to the table, that's what the city will or the Department of Planning will check that off as community engagement, right? And they're assuming that we're speaking for community, which in some ways we are, but also like, other ways we're not, right? We're not speaking for everybody, and we're just one organization. And even though we're one organization that claims to care about the community, right? We're dealing with the nonprofit industrial complex out here, right? And you have a lot of organizations that often don't have the community's best interests at heart, but really have their own financial interests, or have classist and racist issues that they're dealing with within the organizational leadership or structure itself. So sometimes those same organizations that claim to be, you know, um, fighting for community are actively engaged in gentrifying that community, right? So it's, I think, important to, when you're doing this, community engagement as a policymaker, as a planner, that you do your best to actually get out there and speak with everybody, right? From whether it's the street vendor on the corner, people going to church, like whoever it is, like, we don't, as an organization, don't speak for everybody. So you can't just say, all right, I met with them. That's the community engagement box. Now we can move forward with the project. So I think, again, how you build trust is by really actually talking to people and getting out there and learning and hearing from what people are dealing with, and what their needs are in life.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think something that I think about a lot is, and what you all are saying, you're speaking for the community, but you are not necessarily the community. And there's so many different kinds of, or different communities out there. And that requires, as advocates, y'all are in this role of, but you need partnerships. You need strong partnerships through team. We think about partnerships. Is there any, maybe one or two best practices that you all can share as you're thinking through coalition building? Who are the types of groups that you're looking for as you're building these coalitions to help move through policy action and advocacy?
I think in the Portland Clean Energy Fund Coalition, we sought to bring in traditionally white dominant environmental organizations and partner with those folks, and then build up a BIPOC base of frontline leadership internally in the coalition. So the steering committee has always been driven by and for the frontline communities of color, and we still have very meaningful partnerships with all of the white dominant organizations that are part of those groups. So I think sometimes when you may come from a more traditionally privileged, historically privileged group, or you might come from an organization that has more resources, more situational power, it's helpful to step back a little bit, to let go of your agendas, to kind of say, hey, we're just here, relationship building basics, I would say, is like the foundation of every good partnership. So being open to, feedback and critique sometimes, having hard conversations, those are the things that build trust. When we can say the harder things about, hey, sometimes in the past, this organization has done this thing that has hurt us as people of color, systemically, institutionally, accidentally or not, and we can actually have a conversation about that, I think it builds a lot of trust. So I would encourage folks to lean into hard conversations in partnerships, not to start arguments, but just to resolve things, to get clarity, to ground yourself in like the situation that you all are in. And that can take a lot of time. In the PSF Coalition, it took us a couple of years to build those partnerships up, where we were really a fine-tuned, well-oiled machine by the time we got to campaigning. But those partnerships ended up being the backbone of the Oregon environmental justice movement. And we were able to continue on to statewide organizing and broaden our tent even further. So it's worth it. It's definitely worth it to have those conversations if you need to.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add real quick is, yeah, I mean, the coalition that we're building right, Net Z, it is a statewide coalition. So like, we have a number of sub grants and different smaller grants that we're also giving out as part of that to get organizations involved, to pay for people's time. So within the city, it's a lot easier to prioritize Black and Brown led organizations. We have the Chicago EJ Network and number of other organizations that are doing EJ related work as well. But outside of Chicago, it's a little bit more difficult. As we like to joke in the city that anything south of Chicago is the South, because it's very, very, very white outside of the Chicago area. Although there are little pockets that are different, that are more diverse. But so we definitely prioritize, engaging with communities that are most impacted, right? The frontline communities are dealing with EJ issues daily. And yeah, I'll stop there because I know we're out of time.
Thank you. Yes, unfortunately, we are out of time. I could have kept talking to you all for another hour, but we have to hop off. I just want to say thank you for all the work that you are doing and for taking the time today to discuss your work. I'll pass it over to Simbi to close out.
Thank you so much, Alexa, for moderating this panel. Anissa, Andrea, Jose, thank you so much for joining us. And I know during our practice, we were saying an hour is not going to be enough time for us to dive into this conversation. So we do have the presenters' emails and contact information here. Continue the dialogue. Also, we'll be sharing the additional resources, which will include the slides. So if you are interested in signing up for whether it's the newsletter, coalition, or following on Twitter, TikTok, or any of those things, you'll be able to do that and follow up with more information. And if we did not get through all of the questions, we will have the opportunity to continue the dialogue offline. We want to say thank you all for joining us, and we hope you can join us for our next webinar on Tuesday, and that will be Tuesday, September 20th at 10 a.m. Pacific time, where we will be addressing the e-school bus challenges in underserved area. We'll be joined by school districts. We'll be talking about how they how they're navigating the circumstances, whether it's weather or just the rural challenge to bring in school bus to all school districts. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week and a wonderful Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.